Welcome back. All right, so seen some comments, and I'm going to answer some comments. We're going to talk about this now, the whole Canada Post thing. First off, I did see somebody saying stay out of Canada business. I'm Canadian. I live in Canada, have my entire life. I love Canada, and the reality is that I think we're going down a different path than what people seem to understand. So I'm going to go through that, but I'm going to go through what's being reported today. Being reported today. So it's confirmed the Canada Post is laying off employees, and whether it's being done by text or over the phone seems to be the logistical question that's out there. And they're saying the action's temporary because people are off right now, and obviously Black Friday comes and goes. You do not get the Black Friday packages. It's a much less. They're saying they've lost over 10 million in packages that have gone, parcels that have gone to others that they would have had by now this time of year. And I'm going to talk about why, and I've seen a recent comment of, hey, the union, this is the perfect time. It would be, except. So I'll go through this. So the union says the layoffs violate the law. And I've seen people make that argument that they can't. It's against the law. Fine. But let's come back to that in a moment, because if somebody lays you off and it's illegal. I worked at a job where the boss yelled and screamed at everybody a lot. And he was really verbally abusive and would go up one side of the basically whoever he decided it was time to go after. And there were times that he would be yelling and screaming and somebody would say, "What?" And he'd fire them on the spot. He'd be like, "You're gone, get out of here, go." And then they'd look at the rest of us online like, are they serious? Because it was always somebody new. It was somebody new that didn't know that when he was yelling, you don't answer, you don't even look up, you don't even make eye contact, you just look down. And we just kind of shrugged at the person, whoever it was on that day, who was fired on the spot. I at one point pissed the boss off, so the boss put me on a job that he knew I physically couldn't do, and said to the guy across the line from me, "You let me know when he falls behind and I'll fire him on the spot." So I kept up. I knew I had to. And if anybody's going to say, well, that seems to be against labor code. Oh, it is. Oh, you can't do that to your workers. And he knew that too. Because he would yell at them on the way out the door. Go ahead. Report me to the labor board and see what happens to you. Go for it. Give it a shot. See what happens. You have no power. I have all the power. Get out. So I have had bosses who they know they're the boss. And so if somebody in the union gets fired, well, your choice is then to file a complaint with the government, right? You can file a class action lawsuit if you get people together on that. But who has more money? The people who are looking to get their jobs back, or Canada Post? And the answer is going to be Canada Post. And that's the sad reality of it. And when my boss was yelling and screaming at people and kicking them out for absolutely no cause whatsoever, none. There was no reason to fire these people. He knew nothing was going to happen. And the bosses above him knew exactly what he was like on that line. They knew exactly what he did to people. They knew he was throwing people out for absolutely no good reason. People who didn't have attendance issues, didn't have a problem doing the job, but they talked when they weren't supposed to, and they're gone. They're gone. So our bosses above him knew. They didn't care. They got their numbers. They got their numbers. They wanted to get a certain amount of product through, and they got it under him. Because everybody was too scared to say anything. Everybody was too scared to stand up for themselves, because if they did, they'd lose their job. So this idea that, and this is why I support unions, because in a union environment, that shouldn't, I'm saying shouldn't because it can happen, but it shouldn't happen, right? And I worked a union job, and it was very, very different from the experience I had with the non-union jobs. It was a completely different experience when you're dealing with a supervisor or you're dealing with a big boss. When you're part of a union, it is completely different. And I understand that the CUPW is a union. I get that. I don't like Cup W. It doesn't sound right. And then I keep wanting to say CUPE because I'm used to CUPE. But anyways, so Canada Post is making the claim that the bargaining agreement is expired. They do not have one. Therefore, they can fire people. They can lay people off because they don't have an agreement. They have no, from a sports perspective, the way they're looking at it is, let's say it's a lockout and somebody doesn't have a contract, they're a free agent. Well, sorry. And I know that's a bad example. I get that's a bad example. I understand. But it's the way that they're kind of looking at it. Like, okay, we don't have an agreement. They're not working. So who cares if we fire them? Who cares? And if they want to sue us, go for it. What are you going to do? Now, to this point, the government's saying they've received no labor complaints. So nobody's filed a complaint yet with the government. And it's a daunting task. I did see one saying that he makes less money as a mail carrier now than he did 10 years ago. I don't doubt that. I have zero doubt. Right now, financially, most Canadians are struggling. There is a large part of Canada, and it's not just in Canada, it's a large portion of North America. And it's part of the reason why when there's elections, you see the incumbents out because people get mad at the ones that are in power, right? So there's going to be an election in Canada, likely, I would say early next year. I don't think it's going to be that far into 2025. And the incumbent government has zero chance of getting like, I'm not going to get political here, but there's zero chance of getting reelected. There's none. Absolutely none. So no labor complaints are received by the government as of yet. Canada Post claims they lost $315 million in the third quarter. And I saw people saying, well, they've got this brand new sorting machine and new trucks and blah, blah, blah. They're not going to stop spending money. It's not going to happen. Canada Post is basically saying, we're going to change operations and here's how. And they're going to make it happen with or without union support. And I understand the idea that, well, they can't. But they're sure as hell going to try. And that the reality is, I've seen, if they're going to deliver on weekends, full-time positions, they want those in that spot. The union wants full-time positions in that spot. I don't think they're going to get it. I don't. And I remember the last time that my union was up for a new agreement with the boss, and there was a bunch of stuff that I wanted, that a lot of us wanted. We're like, okay, we want these assurances for our job. And in the end, we got virtually none of it. The agreement was put in front of me, and I was told basically, we're going to accept this by the union. And I was like, well, what if we don't like parts of it? Too bad. This is as good as it's going to get. They're not offering us more than this. It's not going to happen. And it feels like Canada Post releasing this information about losses, 315 million up from 290 million last year. They're not stupid. They understand that this is a crown corporation. So when they talk about losses, these losses are not coming from the CEOs, the guys with the great offices. It's taxpayer money. And they know it's taxpayer money. And they know by releasing this information, the taxpayers are going to look at this and go, what the hell? They want more money when the company's already losing that much. I know it's more complicated than that. I get it. I get that it's more complicated than that. But this is the information that's out there publicly. And it's a public that's making less money too. They're paying just as much money for groceries as everybody else. This is a situation where, for lack of a better way of putting it, it's a game of chicken. See who blinks first. And union negotiations very often are that. One side is going to have to capitulate. And so if Canada Post can turn public sentiment against the union, which, again, I don't think it's that hard in this day and age. I've seen some people say things about unions that are inaccurate. People complain about union dues. Our union dues at my last job were 1/2 of an hour's pay. So it was about $8 a paycheck. And I knew that I was earning probably about $2 more per hour than I would have been if I wasn't in a union, just because of other jobs around and knowing what they paid, ones that weren't union. So I knew we got paid better because we were in a union. And I knew it covered more than the union fees and the dues. But there's a lot of people who go, oh, dues, union's not worth it because of the dues. Just, it's not. But there's a reason why when you talk about going union and you're in a non-union facility of any sort, that the first thing the boss will do is go, it's a shame if we have to close this location. But we might. And one of the companies I worked for, the call center I used to work for, and I guess I can talk about this now because they're closed in Chilliwack, but one of the other branches unionized and immediately got closed down. They unionized, and right away the company was like, all right, so you guys are a union, bye. And they took all their call volume and sent it elsewhere. Customers were then waiting 20 to 30 minutes on hold, whereas usually they just got a hold of an agent right away. And they didn't care that they were destroying their own handle time's the wrong one. It's a term for the amount of wait time that people have, and they were destroying their own metrics. Metrics is a good way of putting it. They were destroying their own metrics because they did not want a union, and they knew that if that union location stayed open, then others would unionize as well. So when we talked about it, and it was just like preliminary, one person kind of brought up the topic, and it was all over the building. And the next thing you know, there's emails getting sent out. The certain strategic people are being called into meetings with supervisors and people higher up, saying, "Been some union talk. You know your job's gone if you go union, right?" And they weren't kidding. There's a reason that employers don't want a union, because they don't want to pay more money. That's really all it is. And also there's certain workers' rights you have to respect, and you can't just fire people willy nilly. So that's how you can tell. One of my first jobs, definitely not union. Boss standing there yelling and screaming at everybody. Now, the comments about the corruption and the greed in Canada Post, I've worked for various companies. There's always been a level of corruption anywhere I've worked. Sometimes it's very minor. Sometimes very minor. It's not a big deal. Sometimes it's like, wow, that's some good corrupting they got going on there. I don't know. Sometimes certain people got preferential treatment because of who they were dating. Sometimes people got treated really badly because they got on the wrong side of somebody higher up in the company. Sometimes people could do a great job and still get treated like absolute garbage because, well, this guy doesn't like you, so sorry. The corruption is going to be there. And for the union, that where the miscalculation is, I saw a comment of, well, this is the perfect time for the union to go on strike because this is the busiest time of year. But January's the dead time of year. So all Canada Post has to do is get through this busy time, point at the union and go, it's their fault that you're not getting that package from grandma in time for Christmas. It's their fault that your dad's ashes are lost somewhere in a sorting facility and they're not coming out until the strike's done. And then in January, things are quiet. There's going to be rural stuff, and I get that. And I understand. I saw one too saying, hey, in the territories it's necessary. Of course it is. But where it's headed, where I think all of this is headed, and I would expect this to start coming up a lot more, is privatization. I don't want to see it either. I don't want to see privatization of healthcare. I don't want to see privatization of education. I don't want to see privatization of all of these things, all these crown corporations, but they cost tax money. And so all you have to do is stand in front of people and go, these guys are using your dollars. These guys are, your money, your tax money pays for them, and look what they're doing. And you're going to rile people up. People are going to get angry. And so here we are. And it comes down to, and it's the same as I've covered in sports when it comes to lockouts. Who has more money? The bosses have more money, way more money than the workers. So who can starve who? The bosses can starve the workers. And by going on strike when they did, it has created a situation where people are going to be mad. And the anger generally doesn't end up going to the company, it ends up going to the union. The writer's strike in Hollywood. People didn't boycott the studios. People got mad at the actors. They got mad at the performers. And they're like, these guys make millions and millions of dollars. And they didn't care that this union also represented people who did not make millions of dollars. People who make, a few bucks here and there. And it was for all of the union. But people just focus on the stars and all that. So I don't know how this ends. I don't. And I want it to come to an end because, Canada Post is an essential service. I am of the mind that it should be considered an essential service like medical, like various others where, yeah, they can strike, but you can't just shut everything down because there's people who really desperately need that service. And I know that would take the the idea of a strike, and it just pulls that away from the union. And I understand that's the one arrow they have in their quiver. But at some point in time, I could see a government coming forward and saying this is an essential service, and turning to people and going, remember when, right at Christmas time, you had to go to UPS, you had to go to Purelator, which, yes, is owned in part by Canada Post. So, like, they're making the money anyways. I mean, the last time that Canada Post went on strike, that was brought up a lot, actually, that, well, they own Purelator, too. So it might be in their best interests to handicap the Canada Post traffic to get more money through Purelator. How do you stop that? How do you stop it? I don't know how you stop it, but it is not a fun situation. It's not something that I'm overly happy to talk about, and I just wanted to talk about it last night because I was like, I just want to do a video on this quickly on here's my opinion on this, and the internet had some opinions, so I'm perfectly fine answering that. So, is laying off people while they're on strike illegal? Probably, yeah. Yeah, against the labor laws? Sure. But in order for that to be enforced, you have to get complaints. And then you'd be looking at probably a class action lawsuit. And then you have to have enough money to go through all that. You have to have enough money. And for the workers, while you're getting strike pay, it's not the same as your usual pay. And I know when I was in union and we signed the agreement, that was something we thought about was we can't afford to go on strike. And we were in a very similar position where if we'd gone on strike and I think I mentioned this in the last video, if we'd gone on strike during the busy time, they just would have laid us off because they laid people off when things get quiet anyways. And it wasn't exactly you'd lay people off. You'd just give them 2 days a week. So you'd go from 5 days a week to 2. And people can't live on 2 days a week. We've seen a lot of full-time positions turn into part-time positions. It's caused a lot of people to have to work 2 jobs where they had one before. And the economy's shifted. Companies are trying to cut corners anywhere they can. This big collection behind me, there's people that are upset because, companies cut corners now making sports memorabilia. And they want more money for it than what they got before. And the reality is just that's how everything kind of is right now. The quality has dropped everywhere. I'm glad people are starting to pay attention. This whole thing too, they're making us pay more for less. I noticed that over 20 years ago. I noticed that because I would drink soda and pop, and I noticed that like the amount of milliliters if you're Canadian or ounces if you're American would drop, and the price would stay the same, and there wouldn't be any discussion. It would just be that got smaller, and this got smaller, and bag of chips got a lot smaller. Bags of chips, the bag itself's bigger, but it's mostly air now. It's just that's how companies work. And so you're left in a position, and I feel bad for mail workers. I understand that they don't make a ton of money, but the corporation's been cutting and cutting, and they're going to keep doing it. And for people who are affected by this, you're going to have more people that go paperless with their bills. I saw the comments too, and I answered one on how they make a lot of money on flyers. Understandable. The one thing with that is flyers. I remember even going back to the 80s. You could tell when there was flyers because you'd go into the post office to check your mailbox, and there'd be a garbage can, and people don't hit the garbage can very well. Even in Canada, you'd think they'd hit it, but they no. And it would just be filled and overflowing with whatever that flyer was that was in the mail. And they'd go, oh, I know what's in the mail today. And I'd add it to the collection. You just throw it out. It's called junk mail for that reason. And people generally don't really like junk mail. And you don't have an option either. At one point, my wife talked to her mail carrier about, can we just not get junk mail? And they're like, nope, we have to give this to everybody. So we just throw it into the recycling. It is absolutely, seriously wasteful. It is so wasteful. So I wanted to talk about this tonight and just answer some of these things and have people understand that I've been a worker my whole life. I absolutely I support unions, and I understand people in unions on that. But on this one, it feels like a miscalculation because when they would get the most hours, when they're going to have the most volume, is when this has taken place. And so it's a situation where Canada Post can get leverage out of this, and they can get the messaging out there in a way that is more difficult for the union to do. So, there you go. I hope, and for anybody who was offended by last night's video, I apologize for that. I do, I sincerely do, but it is my opinion that things need to change. The company needs to change. They're going to have to start adapting to couriers because, and I found the data from earlier today too, because I did see one comment too. If couriers haven't eaten into Canada Post, they have. It absolutely has. And after the pandemic, it's even more just, it's a lot, right? So, like, at some point in time, it has to change. And I would think too, like I said, a lot of people are going to go paperless coming out of this. People who normally would get like paper checks, now they're going to be like, okay, how do I do the whole e-transfer thing? How do I get this automatically deposited into my account? And then there's less paper mail, which has been the trend for years now. And I think this is just going to make it go higher. And so, yeah, there you go. So if you're affected by this, if you're one of the workers, honestly, I really hope you guys get some of what you're looking for. It's not going to be all of it. It's never all of it. I hope you guys get some of what you're looking for. I hope you get those assurances of your jobs. In my experience, it's probably going to be one or the other. You're probably going to get the money or you're going to get the job assurance. It's probably not going to be both. Because from my experience, the way they ended up buying my union off was to basically make it like, okay, you guys are getting a raise of this amount, but for brand new workers who come in, they're going to start at a much lower rate, and their top rate is going to be much lower than what you guys make. And people signed. People signed. And then my concern with that was simple. Okay, so all the new workers are going to make less money than we do. So we're going to have to do the really hard jobs. And when our bodies break down or when we get frustrated and we quit, that's saving them some money. And a lot of people I worked with when that agreement was signed 8 years ago are gone. So I guarantee you that company's making way more money than they were before that agreement was signed by the union, because people in the union were like, well, we don't want to go on strike and we'll take the extra money. And in the end, the company still won. So there you go. But thank you guys for your support. For people who've subscribed, thank you. And for people looking for wrestling videos, there will be more wrestling content, I promise. But yeah, thank you guys for your support. It does mean a lot. If you haven't already hit like and subscribe, please do. And it is weird to me how now everything's considered political. It is bizarre to me how everything, like a union strike, can be, oh, that's political. I don't think it is. I think it's newsworthy. I don't think it has to be. Although with it being a crown corporation, that's where it gets kind of sticky. And again, that's where I think it's easier for them to turn the public in favor of their point of view as the employer than it might be if it was another company. If it was McDonald's or Burger King, because there's no crown, there's no taxpayer dollars tied to that. So there you go. But thank you guys for your support. It does mean a lot. And I will talk to you again soon.